Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have 3 stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now let's get into the stories. My initials are RM. And that's all I'm going to share with you on my identity, by the way. I'm writing this report in order to try to get help from whatever entity may be able to aid me in my time of need. It all started in 2020 in Jasper County, South Carolina, where I live. I had been hearing strange howls and other noises for a while at that point, but at the time, I didn't realize what I had been hearing. I only figured it out in retrospect. So anyway, one night I was laying in bed watching TV, and in the distance I was also listening to the barking. But there was also strange screams at the same time that night. I got up from my bed to listen closer because it felt like something bad might be happening outside, and I didn't feel right not to check. So I got up and I went outside to investigate these noises further. Once outside, I now could hear the noises more clearly than ever before. It was almost like they were calling me to come closer. Like, I swear I could hear voices in my head telling me that. But of course I had no interest in following them. But I did feel safe just checking around the yard, so I took a walk around and behind the house. We have a lot of land there, and the house is about a mile from the nearest road because we have a really long driveway. After taking only a few steps, I heard something coming towards me from out of the nearby woods. The woods surrounded my home on all sides, except for where there was a small opening to the main road that connected to the driveway. Anyway, after hearing the noise, I stopped, and I listened. I kept hearing these howls and screams growing closer and closer, until finally this dog-looking thing jumped out from behind a tree and started running directly towards me. Within seconds, I was literally just feet away from this thing, and it stopped dead in its tracks. I could clearly see its face now, which was wrinkled like an old man's, but with these large fangs where regular teeth would be. I slowly reached around for my pocket knife that was clipped to my pants, but even though I knew that a tiny little knife was no match for this creature, I felt better than having nothing at all. Anyway, the thing then lunged at me and tried to swipe at me with its claws, which I felt were like 10 inches long. Luckily for me, I was able to move out of the way in time, and I swiped back with my knife. I didn't hit it, but I think it was enough to get it to back off because it paused for a second, and I was able to then turn around and run. But as I ran back to the house, I swear that thing was right behind me. I mean, it sounded like its breath was only inches from my ear. I sprinted towards home without looking backwards, and I just kept running until I tripped over something and fell face first into the ground. At this point, my adrenaline was sky high, and I picked myself back up. I ran into my house, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and then just collapsed against my front door in a puddle of sweat. I fell to the floor, and I laid there for 10 minutes or something, making sure that there were no more sounds before I finally got up again. I decided to go back outside to double-check everything, but this time I took my rifle. I don't think it would have done me much good because I heard once that these creatures can't be brought down with bullets. But I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, I wandered around the yard for a bit, and the sounds had all but gone away. I figured that it must have gotten bored of messing with me and maybe went on its way. So I decided to just head back inside. I started walking back towards my house for the second time that night when suddenly the thing came crashing towards me again. But this time, it wasn't headed towards me. This time, I watched as a second creature just like it was chasing after it. I watched as the two of them ran past me and off into the woods. And even stranger was that these things looked like they were fighting or something, because they were both snarling and growling at each other as if they wanted to rip each other apart. They ran off and disappeared back into the forest beyond the house. Once again, I made it inside without any harm done except a few cuts and bruises from the initial encounter. Not sure why those things didn't kill me or hurt me. and who knows what was going on between the two of them. All I know is that these creatures do exist, and they could be watching me or you, any of us, at this very moment. I'm very curious now when I go outside, and I don't really wander around out there in the dark anymore, but I do know that these things are out there in the shadows, and I think they're just waiting for another opportunity to attack. I'm a police officer, and we get plenty of calls for break-ins. It's far from unusual, especially in the neighborhood where this all happened. So when we went to the house that night, I certainly didn't expect to find anything unusual about any of it. We received the report around 3:15 to 3:30 in the morning. The wife had called stating that the family had been asleep, but that she was awakened by some strange movement that she heard in her room, followed by a shadow lurking around the house. She claimed that her newborn had started crying in this instance, and that she woke her husband, and he went and woke their other children. Once everybody was awake, they all piled into the car, and that's when they called us. When we arrived, the family was still sitting there in their vehicle. The husband said he had checked parts of the home, but not all of it, and that they said he had seen somebody inside, again, after they had already gone outside. Myself and some of the other officers cautiously entered the home. To our surprise, not much had been disturbed. We slowly went room by room. The children's rooms looked as they should. The beds were unmade, the televisions were still on, and a normal amount of toys and clothes were thrown around the room. The kitchen, dining room, and living room were tidy. Not even a couch cushion was out of place. The kitchen had some dishes from that night in the sink, but nothing out of the ordinary. We checked closets, under beds, in the cupboards, and any place somebody could hide. It wasn't until we entered the master bedroom, the room in which the wife first saw the intruder, that we found some unusual evidence. The master bedroom had a bathroom located within the room. It was off to the east, and it was decent in size. In the bathroom, all of the cabinets had been left wide open, and the bathroom faucet was running. When we asked the couple if they had done this, they both replied that neither of them would have any reason to do such a thing. And then they asked, why would a potential burglar do that? I wasn't too sure why anyone would do it, but without anyone to apprehend, we surely wouldn't get the answer. I explained to the family that the house was clear and that they could go back to bed without any concern, but I did suggest that they lock the doors and the windows. The wife explained that everything had already been locked up, and she asked if we had found where they had possibly entered. I told her that we didn't find any signs of forced entry, but that she could call us again if she noticed any more activity. And with that, we all left. It wasn't until a couple nights later after this call that we got called back to the same house for the same thing. I had a feeling that we would catch the perpetrator this time. The family had more urgency and left the house in a faster manner. The wife said it was because the family had all been sleeping in the master bedroom together. They were all still pretty shaken up from the previous incident. When we started looking around the home again, it was the same situation. Nothing was out of place. There was no signs of forced entry. But this time, all of the lights in the house were turned on, and all of the cabinet doors were opened. Meanwhile, the wife hadn't seen anybody this time, but everybody in the home claimed that the lights turned on in all the rooms except the master bedroom and bathroom, so they knew someone was inside. I'll admit, I thought the family could be pulling our leg. How could we have been called multiple times without any trace of anyone besides the family being in the home? And the other particular thing was that nothing had been taken either time. Even though the family lived in a pretty humble manner, the family had some nice electronics, like televisions and video game consoles. If someone was looking to rob them, these would probably be the things to take. I had some of the other officers leave. I didn't want to waste our time and resources on something that would prove to be insignificant. And maybe this was my first mistake. I did feel bad for the family, but I also suspected that they were making false claims. I'm not sure why they would do this, but that seemed more reasonable than a burglar who refused to steal. At this point, the officer I was with was taking a report down, so I decided to give the house one final walkthrough. I started in the kids' bedrooms. Nothing. Nothing in the living room. Nothing in the dining room. The kitchen and laundry room were clear. However, when I reached the master bedroom, I started to feel uncomfortable. None of the lights were on, so it was very dark, and for some reason, it didn't feel very safe. And then I started to hear something moving in the bathroom, so I kept my hand placed on top of my firearm. Maybe the family wasn't making things up after all. I approached the bathroom with extreme caution. As I've mentioned, this person, whoever they weren't here to steal things, so who knew what their motive was? When I turned the corner to the entrance of the bathroom, I saw a large shadow. It looked like the silhouette of a man. He was just standing by the bathtub. I quickly asked him to put his hands above his head. He didn't comply. I asked him again, but I warned him that if he didn't, I would have to defend myself. I tried radioing my partner who was outside, but he wasn't responding. The man just stood there, staring at me. The last thing I wanted to do was fire my pistol. Too many cops had been making bad decisions, and I did not want to be one of them. But I pulled my pistol out, and I called to the man again. Still, nothing happened. And before I knew it, my hand was on the light switch, so I flicked the light on, and I saw nothing. Emptiness. No man, no woman, no person at all. The shadow was gone, and there was no trace of anything left. I sure was thankful that I didn't shoot that firearm, but how would I explain this to the department? And how will I explain this to the family outside? I went outside and told everybody that I had found nothing, that the house was clear, that they were safe, that they could head back in. Thankfully, nothing further ever came from that house, but I still think about that day where I encountered that strange entity in the bathroom. I don't talk about this often because I get laughed at a lot, but I feel like this channel is a safe place, and maybe if I tell my story, I can stop reliving it. Maybe somebody else will know what it was and help me get the answers I've been looking for. Surely I'm not alone, right? I've lived in the South my whole life, and living in the South, you hear about the weird things that happen here, but rarely do you hear about things outside of the area. Imagine my surprise when I traveled to Michigan. I've never wanted to go north before, but my Marine buddy was about to deploy, so of course a bunch of us went up there to hang out before they were shipped out. I didn't have a car, so I jumped on a bus and headed up, because I wasn't going to miss this trip for anything. But that bus ride was hell. I left warm Oklahoma and traveled for hours on a bus full of strangers all the way to Chicago. I felt like we would never get there. And when the bus finally arrived, I was so thankful that my friend had come all the way from Michigan to pick me up, prepared with a jacket, because I was not ready. It was so cold, there was snow on the ground, and I was struggling to understand why I had thought that coming up here was a good idea. Yes, I know that sounds dramatic, but for somebody who may see snow during a crazy, unusual winter, it's completely normal. However, I was happy to see him, so I ran with it. We loaded up in his car and headed to his house. I had no idea what I was in store for. It was dark and the roads were twisty. I was soon completely lost and thankful that I hadn't decided to rent a car when I got there. I was not overly comfortable driving in the snow, and I would have been pretty scared. We had the radio cranked up loud, and I was drumming when my friend said shit and slowed down. I looked up confused. I didn't understand why we were stopping, but it didn't take long to figure it out. Ahead of us, about 20 feet in front of the car, I could barely make out a figure. We kept creeping forward slowly, much to my annoyance. I'd been on a bus for what felt like days and was just ready for a hot shower and some clean clothes. I quickly shot a look over at my friend, but then looked back in front of us as his face was ghost white. I slapped my hands over my mouth in an attempt to stop myself from screaming when I saw it too. The thing was huge. It stood over 6 feet tall, probably closer to 7. But that wasn't even the scariest part, though. It looked like a dog or a wolf, but it stood on its back legs like a human. I had never seen anything like this. I was instantly terrified and wanted my friend to drive. I yelled, "Go!" but they just ignored me as if they were in a trance. I looked between him and the creature. Its amber eyes stared into the car, watching us. I yelled. I couldn't help it anymore. Thankfully, this spurred my friend into action, and he hit the clutch and slammed the car into gear, peeling out and whipping us around. He sped in the opposite direction, back towards where we had just come from, and he was muttering about taking the long way home. I spun around in my seat where I could watch the creature grow smaller as we drove away, but the ear-splitting howl that it loosened as we got away made my blood run cold. It sounded like a man was screaming, but it vibrated in my chest, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I didn't stop watching until we had put so much distance between us that I couldn't even make out the black shadow anymore. When I turned back around in my seat, I was petrified. What had just happened? My friend reached over and grabbed my hand, telling me to look at him. When I finally calmed down enough, I said, "What was that?" But he just shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter. It won't follow us. I've never seen it that close to town." Even when I was sure we were okay, I was still anxious. I felt like I was going to be sick from the fear. If I closed my eyes, I could see it in front of us. I could see its amber eyes staring into mine. I could hear its screaming howl. I didn't feel like we could get far enough away to feel safe. I was so angry. Why wouldn't he have warned me about this? I mean, this was insanity. And the way he was so calm after we just got out of sight of it, was that normal? How could this be happening? Looking back, even if he had warned me, I wouldn't have believed him. I would have laughed and told him he was crazy. But now I do. I saw it with my own eyes, and when I tell people, now they look at me like I'm crazy. This creature is in every nightmare that I have. I remember trying to tell his parents what we saw, and they just patted my hand, trying to tell me that I needed to sleep and that my mind was just playing tricks on me. But it wasn't sleep that I needed. This thing was and is real, and I hated that they thought I was crazy. I know that I will never step foot back in Michigan again. I don't know what that creature was, but I know that I do not want a repeat run-in. I hope that some of your listeners can confirm what I'm telling you. I mean, my friend refuses to talk about it at all, and I really need some companionship on this. Thank you.